Long-term relationships, the ones that matter, are all about weathering the peaks and valleys. Nicholas Sparks. Sometimes when we get in the valleys, we don't understand what to do or what to say. I say, let's go ahead and steer into that skid.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in the Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
What is up, leaders? Welcome to the Fire Forged Leader podcast. I'm Steve Baumgartner, your host and founder, and I would like to take you on a journey of the Forge, where we're going to explore lessons learned on the front lines of leadership. I'm going to talk a little bit about my son today and also my childhood. And just a little portion of it, I'm not going to go back through the whole thing. But what I am going to do is I'm going to tell you about a little bit of time that I spent in the Midwest. And to be honest with you, that was most of my life. However, I want to bring you back. And I want to talk about when my father was teaching me how to drive. I remember my dad was always adamant about making sure that us boys could drive on ice. I understand why now because, we are going to need that knowledge and we are going to need it a lot. And I still use it to this day. So as I was beginning to drive, I remember my dad, he took me out to an abandoned parking lot. All it had was a whole lot of space, a whole lot of ice, and a few light poles here and there. We were driving out there in my old 77 Plymouth Fury, a car that my dad purchased from my grandfather. And this is probably the fastest it ever went, to be honest with you. But what my dad did was he had me gain up some good speed, enough to where it was really starting to make me nervous. And then he did something that made my heart rate double. He reached over and he grabbed a hold of the wheel and gave it a bit of a yank. So all of a sudden, the car was skidding on the ice. I was in the driver's seat, not knowing what to do. And my dad just calmly says, "Steve, what are you going to do?" And I'll tell you, I have no clue what my response was on that day. Pretty sure I probably got soap in my mouth afterwards because it couldn't have been very nice at that point. But I do remember the feeling. I remember his calm voice and I remember my heart beating. I was highly anxious. I was very irritated, but I remember how calm his voice really was. Whatever I said or did at that moment wasn't important. What is important, however, was the very next thing that came from his lips. And he simply said, "Steve, you need to drive with your butt." He might have said ass, I don't know. But we're going to say, you need to drive with your butt. Take your foot off the brake and simply turn towards the skid. Now, if you haven't driven on ice before, you're probably going, "That's stupid advice. Absolutely stupid." But it's really not. It's the best thing that you can do especially in a rear wheel drive car, is to take your foot off the brake and steer into the skid. Now, I probably thought it was stupid at the time, but I'll tell you, I also had a lot of trust in my father. So I did exactly what he asked me to do. And guess what? I was able to correct the icy skid and bring that car back under control. So that night, we practiced this technique over and over. I'm not sure how many times we did it, but it was a bunch. And it was important to him that I learn this technique. It was so important that I practiced it throughout my adulthood many, many times. And I just practiced it more and more in empty parking lots. I test the roads by getting myself into a little bit of a skid to see how fast I can go. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I do it just to make my kids laugh and give them a little bit of a thrill. But regardless, I practice this technique throughout my whole life over and over and over again. So thinking about, this whole ice situation being in the Midwest, steering into the skid, there's a couple of key points that I want to pull back out of that. The first point is to correct that skid, I had to do something totally counterintuitive to what I wanted to do. First, I took my foot off that brake. That brake's like your safety net when you're driving, but it's not on ice. You do the exact opposite. You pull your foot off that brake. And then the second thing that I did was I actually steered toward the way that I was skidding. It seems like you'd want to pull back the other way, but all that does is make you skid more. It makes you spin around. Second thing is that I want to pull out today is my father was the calm in the storm. Now, forget about that part where he actually created the storm. But while we were in the heat of battle, he was the calm voice that talked me through it. And the last thing is to be able to react correctly today and every other day that I'm alive on ice in my car. I remember this lesson, but I also know how to react. And I remember the lesson because I had it ingrained into my mind. And the reason why is because I reinforced it over and over and over through practice with my father, but also practice on my own. And I've ultimately made it an instinctual sort of behavior. When I'm on ice, I start to skid. I take my foot off the brake and I turn the other way. Now, with front wheel drive cars, you can actually give a little bit of accelerator as well and drive out of the skid. Excuse me. So I'll also state that I believe that relationships are much the same as driving on ice. Sometimes we need to do what's totally counterintuitive to make progress in rough conversations or rough situations with people. So, with that being said, I want to share an example. And y'all know this podcast is not just about leading at work, it's also about leading at home, with your children, with your marriage, out in the community, and at work. So, I'm going to give you a home example right now with one of my children's. I think I just said children's, with one of my children. And you've heard about my son multiple times, Dominic. He's 4 years old. I'm sure I probably talked about it before, but Dominic is an intense child. He's probably the most intense child that I've had throughout all 8 of them. He's a constant ball of energy. There is nobody in this world that can keep up with Dominic as far as I'm concerned. Right now, we have him doing jujitsu. He was playing soccer. He rides his bike all the time. He's constantly on the move. But he also doesn't know how to regulate his emotions very well. He holds things in and they pile up and they pile up. And then all of a sudden, he comes out and he's got these huge negative behaviors. He also does the same kind of thing when he gets overly tired. So, these negative behaviors that I'm talking about, he yells, he screams, he throws things. It's things that people would say that he's out of control. He can be irrational, irritated, and overall, he's not a lot of fun to be around in those moments. But he's a good kid at his core. He's just very intense, and he's 4 years old, and it's my job to train him how to be a proper human. So, with that being said, I have my own set of behaviors. When my son is angry and he's screaming and he's irrational and he's throwing things and he's slamming his door, he's yelling at his mom, whatever. My mindset is to oppose this child. My mindset tells me to get angry, that I need to straighten him up and get him to fly right. I need to punish him for these behaviors. And overall, I try and meet his behavior with my own intensity. So we were having a little bit of this kind of thing, not a little bit. We were having a lot bit of this kind of thing here a while back, and it's probably been about 2 months ago. But it was night after night after night we were getting this point with Dominic. We didn't know how to reach him. We didn't know how to communicate with him. I personally was at my wits' end with this kid. We were battling, we were locking horns. We were constantly at each other. We were about as distant could be. And to be frank, I couldn't take much more. I was at my breaking point with this kid. I didn't know what to do, and I hate being in that position, people. But I know I love this kid. And by the grace of God, something in me turned that day, that night, and I just grabbed my son and I pulled him in and I held him close to my chest. I put my hand in his hair and I rubbed his head and I told him, I love you, Dominic. I don't know what to do. But I also reassured him to know that I wasn't going to go anywhere. I was going to keep on trying. I would always be there for him. And I will tell you that I will never forget this moment when I grabbed my son and I held him close and I rubbed his hair and I just talked to him. And the reason why I won't forget it isn't because of my own actions, but what happened at that moment. There was an entire transformation with my son. It was like all of a sudden his walls just came crumbling down. His whole body loosened up. You could feel the tension coming out of his shoulders, out of his arms, out of his chest. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but this kid is so athletic. He came out of the womb with a six-pack ab. I worked my butt off for that crap. Anyways, get back to it. This transformation, his walls crumbled down, his body loosened up. And at this moment, my son, who was just pure rage moments before, he wrapped his arms around me and just buried his head deeply into my chest. I was holding him tight, but he went tighter. So, in this moment, in this embrace, it was the most difficult moment for me to reach out and just pull him close. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to flip him over my knee and spank his butt, whatever the case is. I was angry. He was angry. We were locking horns. I'm arguing with a damn 4-year-old. Come on. But when I grabbed him and held him, all of that went away. So why did this moment have such an effect on my son? And I've thought about this a lot. So when people get in an emotional state, quite frankly, their insides are not always shown well on their outside. They put up defensive walls. Their behaviors become more of a basic instinct of survival rather than being a rational human being anymore. At the same time, my son needed something. He needed something from me at that moment. But he also was only 4 and he didn't know how to express it. So when we meet those kind of behaviors with our own negative behaviors, that's when sparks fly. Friction and friction just equals more friction. So let's turn away from my son for a minute and just ask some simple questions. I want to talk about your marriage or your significant other for a minute. How many times in your relationship have you misunderstood things and it causes a big fight? How many times do you wonder why your spouse is so angry with you after you say something? What about at work? Do you ever have any communication issues? Are there times when you might have an employee or a coworker walk into your office or wherever you're at and just blow up and you're like, "What the hell was that? That ain't never going to happen again." And you bust into their office and you start the second wave. I've done a lot of that in my career, people. But I tell you what, this son of mine has taught me so much about relationships over the past couple of months. So with family, this whole long embrace thing probably works out pretty good. Maybe not with your spouse because sometimes we get so angry, right? So I'm not telling you to go up and grab your spouse or grab your workers, grab your coworkers and put them in an embrace. I'm not telling you that. Don't go out and do that. Nobody likes the trip to the HR office. But what I am telling you is maybe a different approach is warranted. So when things in your work environment, at your home environment, out in the community, when you feel them starting to go sideways into that skid and you force and you force and you can't seem to keep it, the whole relationship from going into the ditch, you need to try a different approach. And then you need to really engage that approach earlier in your conversations with people. So I want you to go and do a test for me. All right. What I want you to do is when your little red flashy light inside your head is going off, that's going, danger, Will Robinson, danger. When someone's communicating with you and you can tell that things are not going in the direction that you want them to go, I want you first to identify it. All right. I want you, number two, to pause. The pause gives you a chance to reset. Number three, be the calm in the storm. I can't tell you how much of an impact my father had on me by being the calm in the storm. I'm dang near 48, people. I was 16 when he was teaching me that lesson. Be the calm in the storm. Now that you're calm, what I want you to do is steer into that skid. Do what feels counterintuitive. If someone's coming at you, blaming you for something, own it. Take ownership. It doesn't feel good at the time, but it's going to work out better for you in the long run. If someone's coming at you in anger, don't be angry. You don't want to hear what they want to yell at you about. But what about if you said, hey, Steve, I get it. I understand that you're angry. I can see that you're angry. And by all means, you're probably justified in your anger. But I don't understand why you're angry right now. I just see the anger. Can you sit down and tell me why you're angry? Can we talk about this a little bit? And just stay calm and bring them into your space. And then last but not least, I want you to practice this technique over and over and over. So let's recap that for a second. First, I want you to identify when you're in this situation. And we all know when things are about ready to go south, but we need to be truthful with ourselves. Identify it. Next, I want you to pause so that you can regain yourself. Get out of the basic instinct. Three, I want you to be calm in that storm. No matter what the storm is, be calm. Then steer into that skid. Do what feels counterintuitive. If they come at you with anger, address them with understanding. And then last but not least, practice this over and over and over and over again until it's basic instinct for you. So, leaders, once again, you have come to the Fire Forge Leader podcast to listen to a message. But listening is not enough. I ask you, what are you going to do to apply this message this week, this month, and this year? Remember, when you become a better leader, and being a leader is an action, you become a better spouse, a better parent, a better coworker, and ultimately that person that other people want to follow. So grow in your leadership skills. Do it for your family. Do it for your community. Do it for the ones you lead at work. And do it for yourself. Lead well, my friends. So, if you appreciate what you heard here today, I invite you to leave a rating and review and smash that subscribe button on whatever podcasting app you're currently listening to. What this does is it helps just move our podcast up in the views, right? So that it comes up on people's apps that they're listening to podcasts on. Gets it out to more people so that this message can filter throughout society on a larger scale. If you're getting something out of this podcast, I guarantee you someone else is as well, or could be. So continue to join us here in the Forge as we bring you these lessons learned on the front lines of leadership. Also, I just want to remind everybody we have some kick-ass guests coming up. We have Tony Ojeda that's booked. We have Nancy Regan who's booked. We have Nick Lavery who's booked. I just started talks with Ray Cash Care, Navy SEAL, and the list just goes on and on. Also, I've been talking with George William, and we're going to do a combined question and answer type podcast coming up. So keep your ears open for that one. And once again, lead well, my friends.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the Forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the Forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the Forge.